was a land of breathtaking beauty. Rolling green hills sloped gently into wide meadows, and at the foot of the mountain, a river ran its course through the heart of a small village. Generations of farmers, laborers, and craftsmen had lived here, tied to the soil, working together to build modest homes and raise their families. Their lives were simple, but they were bound by dignity and community. Then came the billionaires. The wealthy Harrow family, arrogant, untouchable, always flaunting their power, arrived in the village with trucks, lawyers, and guards. They claimed the land was theirs, waving papers that no one in the village could read, though everyone knew the land had belonged to the people for centuries. When the villagers protested, the Harrows crushed their voices with bribes to local officials and threats to anyone who dared resist. On that stolen land, they built a palace, not just a mansion, a fortress of wealth. White marble gleamed under the sun, fountains spouted water, while the villagers walked miles for a bucket, and chandeliers lit up rooms the size of small homes. And the villagers? Many were forced into servitude. The Harrows kept them as workers, but in reality they were treated no better than slaves. Some were cooks, some gardeners, some cleaners, and a few nannies for the children. They worked long hours for scraps of pay, enduring insults and cruelty, because there was nowhere else to go. Among them was Miriam, a maid in her late 30s. Her hands were rough, her back bent from endless scrubbing, but her eyes held a quiet fire. She had lost her husband to illness, and the only way to feed her 2 children was to serve in the Harrows' palace. She hated every minute, yet she endured. For her children, she endured. The Harrows had 3 children, 12-year-old Julia, 10-year-old Marcus, and the youngest, 8-year-old Daniel. Julia, sharp and spoiled, mimicked her mother's arrogance, demanding luxuries even in the middle of the village's poverty. Marcus was mischievous, constantly ordering servants around, and Daniel, the youngest, followed his siblings' example, mocking the workers, throwing tantrums and treating Miriam and the others as though they were invisible. None of them had been taught kindness, only entitlement. Then came the rain. It began as a drizzle, harmless, refreshing, but the clouds gathered thick and heavy, clinging to the mountainside like a curtain. By nightfall, the skies broke open. Sheets of rain poured down, pounding the earth, turning the river into a raging beast. The villagers watched in fear. They had seen storms before, but never like this. The water rose fast, swallowing fields, creeping into homes. By dawn, the village was drowning. Muddy water tore through huts, carrying away possessions, livestock, even people. Screams filled the air. Families clung to rooftops, children cried for their mothers, and the mountain river became a roaring flood. In the palace, chaos erupted. The Harrows panicked as water rushed into their marble courtyard, flooding their luxurious halls. Servants begged to move their families to safety, but the Harrows ignored them. Their only concern was themselves. "Pack the cars," Mr. Harrow shouted. "Get the jewelry, the paintings, leave the rest." Helicopters were called. Black cars lined up at the gates. In their frenzy to escape, they shoved servants aside, leaving them to fend for themselves. Not one gesture of aid was offered to the villagers outside. Not one thought spared for the hundreds of lives in danger. The children were pulled in different directions, Julia clinging to her mother, Marcus crying, while a guard carried him. To the car, the parents were shouting, ordering staff to grab trunks of gold and silver. Amid the thunder of voices and the pounding rain, Daniel slipped away. He had hidden in his playroom earlier, clutching his toy soldiers, too frightened to move as the palace walls trembled. Now, as the servants shouted and his parents screamed for their treasures, he stood frozen at the top of the staircase. In the chaos, his parents assumed he was already with the others. Mrs. Harrow screamed, "I have Julia. Marcus is in the car." Mr. Harrow, half soaked and shouting at the guards about saving antiques, simply yelled, "Then go, go, go!" And in that frenzy, amid their obsession with wealth and the frantic rush for survival, they forgot Daniel. The cars roared out, the helicopter lifted off, and the Harrows fled their palace. They carried jewels, paintings, and trunks of gold. They carried 2 of their children, but they left the youngest behind. Daniel stood alone in the empty halls, the water creeping higher over the marble floors. He screamed for his mother, his father, his siblings, but no one answered. That was when Miriam heard him. She had been gathering her few belongings, ready to run, when she heard the boy's cries echoing through the corridor. She stopped, her heart pounding. Through the dim light, she saw Daniel standing there, terrified, trapped. For a moment, she froze. Here was the child of her oppressors, the boy who had mocked her skin, who had spilled juice on the floor and laughed while she scrubbed. Here was the symbol of everything stolen from her people. The water was climbing higher. Daniel was crying, calling out for the parents who had abandoned him. And Miriam faced a choice. She could turn away, let the flood swallow him as the Harrows had allowed the village to drown. She could walk out, run to her children, and leave. Their boy to the fate he deserved. No one would blame her. In fact, many might say justice demanded it. But her heart twisted. She remembered her own children, how small their hands had been, how helpless in the face of fear. She remembered her husband, his dying words. Never let cruelty turn you into them, hold on to your soul. With a deep breath, Miriam ran to Daniel. Come here, she shouted above the roar. She grabbed his arm as he stumbled, pulling him toward the servants' passage. He was heavy, panicked, slowing her down, but she refused to let go. The flood crashed through windows, sweeping furniture into the current, but Miriam pushed forward. Through the kitchen, through the back door, into the rising waters outside, they fought their way out. Her legs burned. Her chest ached, but she clutched Daniel tight, keeping his head above water as they waded through the storm. At last, they reached higher ground, where the villagers had gathered, soaked and shivering. People gasped when they saw her, Miriam dragging the Harrow boy from the flood. Shock spread through the crowd. Many stared in disbelief, some muttered angrily. Why save him? Why rescue the child of those who had destroyed them? But Miriam only laid Daniel on the ground, pressing his chest until he coughed up water and breathed. She whispered, "A child is still a child." The villagers fell silent. They saw the truth in her words, even if their anger still burned. Hours passed. The rain slowed. The waters began to recede, leaving behind wreckage and loss. Families wept for what they had lost, for the lives swept away. The palace was ruined, its marble halls shattered by mud and debris. And then the Harrows returned. Helicopters circled overhead, landing on the broken fields. Black cars rolled back into the village, splashing mud on the ruined homes. Out stepped the billionaires, dry, dressed in fine clothes, surrounded by guards. Julia clung to her mother's arm. Marcus hid behind his father's leg. Their eyes scanned the wreckage not with sorrow but with disgust. And then they saw him. Daniel, alive, safe, clinging to Miriam's side. Mrs. Harrow ran forward crying, clutching her son. "My baby, my darling." She kissed his wet hair, holding him close. For a brief moment, relief softened her face. Then her eyes turned to Miriam. "You," she spat. "What were you doing with him?" Miriam stood silently, exhausted, her arms trembling from carrying the boy through the flood. "She saved him," one villager said quietly. "She risked her life," another added. But Mrs. Harrow's face twisted. Gratitude never came. Instead, suspicion filled her voice. "You dare touch my son? You could have harmed him." Miriam's jaw clenched, but she said nothing. Mr. Harrow stepped forward, his voice cold. "We will take our children now. The rest of you, clean this mess. We will rebuild the palace." The villagers murmured in disbelief. Their homes had been destroyed, their people drowned, yet the Harrows spoke only of their palace. And then Daniel surprised them all. He clung to Miriam's dress, refusing to let go. "Don't leave me, please," he whispered, his voice trembling. She saved me. Not you. The Harrows froze. Shock crossed their faces. Daniel, their spoiled heir, was siding with a maid. Miriam, he said loudly, saved my life. You left me. She didn't. The villagers stared, the truth now spoken by the one person. The Harrows couldn't silence. For the first time, cracks appeared in the billionaire's armor of arrogance. Their child's words were a knife of shame. The villagers' eyes burned. With anger, with justice, no longer cowering, they stood tall. One elder stepped forward. His voice carried strength. You built your palace on our land. You enslaved us. And when the flood came, you abandoned us. But one of us saved your son when you would not. Remember this. Your wealth cannot wash away your shame. Silence fell. The Harrows had no answer. Their power meant nothing in that moment, not against the truth laid bare before all. Miriam, weary but unbroken, stood with Daniel still holding her hand. She looked at the family with steady eyes and said, I did what you could not. I chose humanity over pride. Learn from it or lose everything. The villagers erupted, not in violence but in a roar of unity. Their voices rose together, demanding justice, demanding freedom. They would no longer live as slaves on their own land. And the Harrows, shaken, could only watch as the people they had crushed found strength in the flood's aftermath. Miriam walked back to her children, Daniel still clinging to her hand. She knelt and looked into his frightened eyes. Go with your family now, but remember this day. Remember who saved you, and never forget what they left behind. He nodded slowly, tears streaming down his cheeks. In his heart, something shifted. The flood had destroyed homes, but it had also revealed truth. Who held compassion and who held only greed. The Harrows left the village. In silence, their heads bowed, not out of humility, but out of defeat. And Miriam stood tall among her people, not as a servant, but as a symbol. She had chosen the harder path, the human path, and in doing so, she had given her people something the Harrows could never steal again: dignity, unity, and hope.